But look behind that wall, and you'll find a completely different environment. Once a threat actor bypasses the outer perimeter and lands on an internal machine, the system's defensive logic shifts from suspicion to implicit trust. The initial breach is rarely the actual target. To reach sensitive databases or the domain controller, an attacker moves horizontally. This exposes the core vulnerability of the frictionless axiom. Traffic moving inside the perimeter is inherently trusted. This creates a strange paradox. If you analyze CM telemetry during a major breach, you will almost never see alerts for failed lateral movement. The failures are missing because advanced attackers don't run exploits to move laterally. They simply log in. Breaking through the exterior firewall is loud and generates thousands of denied connection logs. But once inside, an attacker's movement looks exactly like standard, legitimate network traffic. They achieve this by hijacking the network's native administrative tools, the exact same protocols IT teams use to manage the environment every day. To understand how a single compromised web server turns into a domain-wide ransomware event, we have to look closely at protocols like SMB, WMI, and WinRM operate at the technical level. While the perimeter breach gains the initial entry, the large-scale compromise of the organization occurs through movement across this east-west corridor. Let's start with a freshly compromised node, say a vulnerable Linux web server where an attacker has just gained shell access. The immediate next step is scavenging. The attacker combs the local file system, configuration files, and connected databases looking for any plaintext passwords or cached credential hashes. Once they secure a set of credentials, they need to know if those credentials hold any value in the broader Active Directory environment. They use protocol-agnostic tools like netexec to automate this validation, rapidly spraying the discovered credentials across the internal network. With a single command, they test one username and password pair against LDAP, SMB, and SSH across dozens of servers simultaneously. The objective here is specific. They are looking for a shared local administrator password that an IT team mistakenly reused across multiple machines. Finding that reused password illuminates the viable paths forward, mapping a direct route from low-level systems up to high-value targets like the domain controller. Through systematic credential mapping, a single vulnerability in a localized web application provides the necessary authorization to traverse the entire internal network. With valid administrator credentials in hand, the attacker can bring in the heavy artillery, SMB-based lateral movement tools like PSExec. PSExec executes a specific protocol handshake. First, it authenticates to the target machine over SMB and connects specifically to the admin $ hidden share. Once connected, the tool drops a malicious executable binary directly onto the target's physical disk, inside that folder. The attacker's machine then issues a remote procedure call to the target's service control manager. It instructs the service control manager to install that dropped binary and immediately start it as a new Windows service. Because of how Windows handles service creation, the resulting process doesn't execute as the user who authenticated. It is automatically elevated to NT Authority System. That specific context grants the attacker absolute unrestricted control over the target machine's operating system. But the sheer power comes at a steep tactical price. PSExec leaves behind massive forensic artifacts. The most obvious is the physical presence of the dropped executable file sitting right on the hard drive. It also generates highly visible telemetry for the blue team. Every time PSExec runs, the target machine logs Windows Event ID 7045, service creation. If the attacker fails to cleanly exit their session and run the built-in cleanup routines, that malicious service remains orphaned on the machine permanently, acting as a glaring beacon for investigators. The shell generated by PSExec is incredibly stable, but it possesses absolutely zero stealth. It provides ultimate operational power, but its reliance on hard drive writes and service creation makes it obvious to security teams analyzing Windows event logs. When an attacker requires a quieter approach, they switch away from SMB and utilize Windows Management Instrumentation, or WinRM. The network footprint of WinRM is distinct. It operates over HTTPS, communicating exclusively on ports 5985 and 5986. Using toolkits like Evil WinRM, attackers interface with the PowerShell Web API. This sends code that executes directly into the target's memory. There are no dropped executable files, and no new Windows services are created. The physical disk is completely bypassed. The execution context changes as well. WinRM runs strictly under the privileges of the authenticated user account, not as system. Operating as a domain admin rather than the local system is strategically beneficial when you're trying to blend in with normal network operations. This is the definition of living off the land, co-opting the operating system's native, pre-installed administrative tools for an offensive attack. Because this traffic mimics standard authorized system administration, traditional endpoint defenses and antivirus agents often ignore it entirely. WinRM trades the raw power of system-level access for the stealth of behaving like a legitimate sysadmin, rendering standard signature-based detection useless. The core vulnerability of a flat network is that it allows these native protocols to function as frictionless, high-speed rails for threat actors. To break these lateral attack paths, we have to intentionally introduce internal network friction. The first defensive pillar is microsegmentation. This means breaking the environment apart into distinct silos, separating HR, finance, and domain controllers behind strict internal barriers. Internal firewalls must govern the corridors between these silos, restricting who can initiate administrative connections. The second pillar is continuous telemetry monitoring, tuning the SIEM specifically to flag anomalous administrative protocol usage. If a standard application server suddenly initiates WinRM traffic or an SMB connection to a domain controller, the system should trigger an immediate critical alert. The final pillar is enforcing least privilege and using solutions like LAPS to randomize local administrator passwords, effectively neutralizing the attacker's initial credential mapping phase. Perimeter defenses cannot prevent internal movement. A resilient architecture uses internal boundaries to isolate the lateral